One of the most fundamental things that a student should learn how to do in his or her class is to be able to compute their current average or their current grade in their class. And so in this video, we're going to talk about how to compute your current average when your grade is based off of weights of certain categories. So in this example, we've got chapter test weighted at 50%, homework is weighted at 10%, quizzes are 20%, and the final exam is 20%. Now, some instructors will do their final grades based off of a total point system. We're not going to talk about that way in this video. That'll be in the next video. But this is a very popular way, probably the most common way of computing final grades. So we're going to go with this weighted method here. The first thing I want to point out is that all of these weights need to add up to 100%. Because what's happening is all of these grades together will combine in some way to account for 100% or all of your final grade average. So 10 and 50 make 60, 20 and 20 make 40, 60 and 40 make 100. So these do add up to 100% of your final grade. Now, how do you take these weights and your average in each of these categories and get your final grade? Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take each of these percentages written as a decimal and multiply it times whatever your average is for that category. So your homework average will be times 0.1, your chapter test average will be times 0.5, the quiz average will be times 0.2, and the final exam will be times 0.2. You'll do all those products and then you'll add up all those categories. And what happens is that accumulation of all those points will give you your final average. To help understand this a little bit better, you can think of in an extreme example where everything depends on, let's say the homework is 100% of your final grade. No quizzes, no final exam, no chapter test. You can take them, but they don't matter. They don't account for your final grade. Well, then you would have 1.00, 100% times your final homework average with zeros everywhere else. So they would not account towards your final average, but whatever your homework average would be times 1, and that'll be your final grade. But as you start breaking it down among categories, like the 10%, the 50%, and the 20 and the 20%, we see how that 100% is divvied out, where the higher percentages account for more of the weight towards that final average. And the smaller percentages, like 10%, that's not going to affect your final average up or down very much because you're only multiplying times 0.1. That's all that's being contributed from the homework average. So let's try an example. Let's see how we do. So here we have some chapter tests. So it's 5 chapter tests where the student scored an 88, an 81, a 95, a 79, and a 92. So the first thing we need right off the bat is his chapter test average. So I need one number that represents how he did with the chapter test. So we'll take our calculator, and I'm assuming we already know how to do a basic average. So we'll add these scores up: 88 plus 81 plus 95 plus 79 plus 92. We'll add those up and divide by 5 because he took 5 test grades. So his average is an 87. Okay, so this average, chapter test average, is an 87. All right, now you could do the same thing with the homeworks and the quizzes. To speed things along though, let's just fast forward. Let's just say the homework average was a 96 and the quiz average in the same way was an 85. Now you only take one final exam, so let's say his final exam he scored an 80. So here's how we're going to compute our final grade. We're going to take 0.5, that's 50%, that's the weight for the chapter test, times 87. We're going to add to that 0.1 times 96, that's 10% weight for the homework average of 96. We'll take 0.2, that's 20% average, times 85, and then we'll take 0.2 times the final exam grade of 80. And then when we do all these multiplications and add up this total, that will be our final grade. So let's do that here. So we've got 87 times 0.5, that's the chapter test average, plus 96 times 0.1, that's the homework average weighted at 10%, plus 85 times 0.2, that's 20% weight for the quiz, and lastly 80% or 80 times 0.2, which is a 20% weight for the final exam. So when I push enter, this gives me a final grade of 86.1, which we can round to a grade of an 86. So the final grade for this student would be an 86. This differs instructor to instructor, but usually 0.5 or higher they'll round up, and lower than 0.5 they'll round down. That's not true of all instructors, but usually that's the case. So 86.1 would round to an 86, and then just looking at these grades, that sounds pretty reasonable. His average based off of his chapter test, and even though he had a 96 for the homework, that's great, but it was only weighted at 10%. And things like the quiz average and the final exam would obviously bring that down a little bit to about an 86. So anyways, that's how we compute a final grade or a current average, assuming that our instructor does things based off of weights and percentages. Two things we're going to look at in the upcoming videos. Number one, the most common question I get at the end of the semester from students all the time is, what do I need to get on the final exam to get a B in the class, or an A in the class, or a C in the class, or something like that? And so we haven't really accounted for that here. We'll get into those topics in the next video. And also, how do you compute your current average if your teacher does things on a total point system? So we'll look at those in the next videos, but hopefully this helps you if your instructor does weighted averages.